begin with a quote from an article that was written by Andrew Ramage for Mess and Noise as a response to an Everett True piece that ran earlier in the year, essentially sideswiping the music industry, street press in Australia. And it reads, "One of the most important roles of music journalists is to record the history or create the folklore of a particular time, to give music a context and a narrative. It's this role that Australian writers need to fill at the moment, not indulge in the rock mythology of North America and Britain that Rolling Stone continues to worship." That's our jumping off point for this evening, and essentially in our role as music critics, how much do we have a responsibility to cover local content, and where does that become a millstone rather than, you know, trying to give yourself a certain percentage of local content? Tim, Mia?
Look, my problem with the criticism of Australian music is a problem that I have personally, which is I feel this chronic compulsion to be very gentle, as if I'm dealing with a small cat all the time. Yep. Because if I'm mean, then I'm doing a disservice to my country, and I want to support everything that comes out of this country on principle. Obviously, I'm not a complete bitch. At the same time, if you go around saying that everything's special, then nothing is. So
that sounds dangerously un-Australian, Mia.
And I find myself in a situation where I tend to say pretty generous things because I want to build what we have rather than tear it down. See, unfortunately, you can't give everybody a gold star.
Well, the problem that I've always had with that, and my stance has always been, perhaps sometimes to my detriment, that all music is essentially on the same level, at least to begin with. Some of it's better and some of it's worse. And, you know, I tend to treat Australian music as no different really from any other, music from Great Britain or North America, as Ramage said. And I know that bothers people. I mean, and I know other writers who do that too, and I also know other writers who do what you do. I remember when Neil Wedd used to run his Indie Initiative night and review, he was very vocal about the fact that he didn't want to be critical of new Australian bands because he felt it was important to build them up and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I always thought, but hang on a minute, if these bands are just starting out and they're doing something shit, shouldn't somebody tell them so they can, you know, build on an improved version of themselves?
I think the other thing about this line of argument is that implicitly it is really about live music. Yes. And I mean, even the fact that the quote appears to basically mean local live guitar rock bands versus live guitar rock bands from America and the UK. And I mean, that's not what I'm listening to 90% of the time. But even if you're going to, say, the Australian hip-hop scene or the Australian dance music scene, a lot of it's about, you know, seeing this music in your local culture, and that's probably something that's worth critics to talking about. And if it's something that a critic can make interesting, then they should run with it. It's not what I can make interesting, and my approach tends to be similar. I tend to think that music should stand up on its own once you've removed it from whatever context it's in. Then, when you're trying to work out why it's good, you can start looking at the context. But I think that this writer's saying this is what, you know, critics, their responsibility. It's what their responsibility is. I think what he's really doing is saying, this is what I do, and I want to turn this into a manifesto for everyone else. Yeah. Whereas, you know, the only responsibility for critics is to write well and not be boring and, you know, try to say stuff that will be interesting to their readers. I don't think that you should be more prescriptive than that.
You know what? Ultimately, you can really only write about what you're personally passionate about anyway. And if you're not passionate about creating Australian folklore, I don't think, you know, you can be strangled into it.
The classic thing, just as a jump off from that, you know, the most obvious criticism of criticism is, well, anyone can do it. It's just your opinion. But that's exactly it. It is your opinion. Yeah. And if you don't want to create folklore about Australian music, and the annoying thing is that in saying that, I'm sure we could be accused of, well, there you go, you know, you're not supporting local content, and you kind of can't win in the end.
But also, I mean, who's really making folklore? Who's going to remember these people's live reviews of a British India live set from 2 years ago, or Lord knows a Jet set from 4 years ago? I mean, this stuff is as forgotten as music from any other part of the world. And the notion that critics are actually building something lasting as compared to other rock criticism, is a bit.
I think it's the music's job to create something lasting.
Yeah.
There is this sort of sense, I suppose, in discussions like this one, like that article, that that it's the online journalists. Obviously he is one in that context, and so he was pushing for that. But in the zines and the street press, which is what Everett True was talking about. That it's their job to write the mythology. And yes, in some way, I kind of agree with that. You look back on all the great music criticism, and that's what it does. But it wouldn't be that strong without good music to go along with it.
Yep.
And yes, there is some great music being made in Australia. There's some terrible music too, and there's terrible music being made in America, and terrible music being made in England. And you should be able to treat, because in the end, if you have to single out Australian music for special, percentage of your content, then I think you're doing it a disservice, honestly.
Yeah, you're like treating them like some kind of disabled class if you're going to reserve some kind of special treatment for it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, what has happened when you've given, you've gone down a road dissimilar to mine where you actually have,
I get
sunk the
feedback.
knife in?
Yeah, I got an email a couple of weeks ago saying thanks for the deliberately hurtful review, and I went back and read it, and it wasn't deliberately hurtful at all, because that's not my style, with apologies in one instance.
I wish it was mine. I wish I could actually say my style is deliberately hurtful.
Yeah,
that's my base level of criticism.
I got in trouble for saying that the cover of a Slinky Mix single, they looked like they were, on drugs, and I made some nasty reference, and then the manager complained, and then I was actually working with them, very long story, 2 days later, and they asked me my name, and I made up a fake surname, actually.
Tim Findley.
Yeah, very much so.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I get that all the time.
I have actually said things that I think could be taken fairly badly. Like I described someone as looking like an imminent rape victim, which I thought would go down reasonably badly. And I've interviewed him twice since, and he's never brought it up, and I don't know if maybe I struck a nerve. I don't know.